everyone. I'm Audrey Coleman. I'm Associate Director and Director of Museum and Archives at the Dole Institute of Politics. So pleased you're with us here today for our second installment of our new digital series called Living History. It's a new series with leaders from our nation's flagship history, culture, and government institutions. And these folks will be talking about what they do, what it means, and why it's important right now. I'm so honored to have with us Mr. Crosby Kemper, who is the Director of the Institute for Museum and Library Services. He's the 6th Director of the Institute, and he received his confirmation in the US Senate earlier this year in January 2020. If his name is familiar to you, you might remember that he was also the former director of the Kansas City Public Library and presided over that institution's flagship programming and community engagement, which is a model for institutions everywhere. So Crosby, thanks so much for being with us today.
Audrey, it's great to be here, great to be talking to you, and great to be a part of the Dole Institute's series. I have to tell you that I want to say hi to Senator Dole. I assume he'll be watching at some point, but because he gave me my first political job. In 1972, I worked for Bob Dole, who was then the chairman of the Republican National Committee at the Republican National Committee headquarters on Capitol Hill.
Long and winding roads for all of us.
Exactly.
So tell us, Crosby, tell us about the IMLS and what your agency does.
So the IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, is the federal government's agency that supports libraries and museums. And we're an agency not unlike the NEA or the NEH, the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities, which more people know about than the IMLS. I suspect just because their names and their acronyms are easier than ours, because we have a bigger budget actually. But we support libraries and museums, and we do research. Right now we have a big research project on the coronavirus and its impact on specifically on books and library materials and interactive materials in museums. And we're publishing that on a weekly basis to help libraries and museums reopen. We do things like that, and then make grants to individual libraries and museums and to library and museum associations to help further the interests of the professions.
So during this time of unprecedented times, as we say, and during pandemic times, museums and libraries really, we know, pride themselves on connecting people with things and connecting people with people, and those things are both inhibited or not permitted at this point. That dynamic is severely challenged. So how can we do our best to make an impact in our communities given these challenges?
And we like to define our largest mission as helping libraries and museums have a positive community impact. If you say that the taking away the physical space, mostly some libraries and museums have reopened to do things by appointment or in small groups. And so we're slowly doing what the rest of the country is doing. But there are a lot of other ways that you can have an impact. And libraries and museums are growing their technological outreach, their virtual outreach online dramatically before the pandemic, and now it's exponential there. So we have projects to increase the digital capacity of libraries and museums. We have projects to do digital outreach, digital curricula, museums presenting their exhibits virtually online, libraries reaching out with story times online, with electronic books. E-books have been growing very dramatically before this, and have grown in many libraries. New York Public Library, for instance, Tony Marks has said they've grown their electronic book circulation 40% just since the beginning of the pandemic. So all those forms of outreach, and particularly across the digital divide, we focused a lot of our outreach to cross the digital divide to bring empowerment one way or another, hotspots, for instance, lending hotspots to at-risk communities, challenged communities, poverty communities, poorer communities. So that's a dramatic part of our response to the virus. The ongoing community activities, for instance, the Wing Luke Asian Pacific American Museum in Seattle, they've given them a grant to increase their awareness of their community and to be able to present in both digitally and ultimately in person the Asian Pacific American experience, not only to the large Asian population in Seattle, but to the rest of the community, and to analyze the impact of that on their own community they represent, as well as on the larger community in Seattle, in order to increase their visitorship, increase their impact on the community, and bring that story to bear. Or another example closer to home, to where we are, in Lawrence and Kansas City, in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma State Library, we've given them money to give to libraries to organize their health literacy presentation in their individual communities to increase the health literacy, the health knowledge of the community, the information outreach, and to explore the ability to deliver with other community organizations, not only information, clinical services in smaller communities. So there are a lot of ways to do community impact. Even during the coronavirus, you could do it digitally. You can do various forms of outreach. We're doing curbside delivery of books, as an example, increasingly appointments to use computers inside the building, that sort of thing, and that will grow.
You mentioned the digital divide and that problem of access to technology. I mean, as we've been having conversations the last few weeks and months and talking about schools starting up again or not in the fall, probably most like on large scale, using a model that we haven't before. Do you think that there's a role for museums and libraries to kind of grow into this area and maybe work more closely
with
the education?
Yeah, virtual education's been growing for a long time, and we're starting to get good at it. There's no replacing a direct contact with a teacher. That's absolutely true. But during the virus, and I think after, this is going to be true as well, the ability to offer additional resources and enhanced resources virtually, or to catch people who can't do it any other way. So for instance, at the Kansas City Public Library, before the virus, but it's going to be growing at Mid-Continent Public Library as well, we were doing a program called the Career Online High School, which is a fully accredited high school online, national accredited high school, in which you're catching folks who've dropped out of the normal alignment, normal cycle of education, who are in their 20s typically, and giving them a career-oriented high school education. And we've actually graduated a number of people in the Chicago and LA libraries have been doing this a little bit longer, graduated hundreds of people now in that environment. So there are things like that you can do, but also as an example, a museum that I've talked to recently, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, they were already doing some things with Arizona State University, sort of community college level course on military history that was an accredited course. And now they're working with the city and school district in New Orleans and other institutions, the library, to do K through 12 education, to do actual curricular things. And so those are just a couple of examples, a myriad of examples I could give you of virtual education. Some of it actually accredited part of formal education, and then a lot of informal after-school education, or simply the ability to be connected. Libraries are still a huge connector in places where the digital divide exists and people don't have the connectivity. And that outreach is growing fairly dramatically. So the Topeka Library, for instance, has done this, and Kansas City is doing it, where on your bookmobiles or additional forms of mobile Wi-Fi are being distributed into the community, into places where there isn't a connection, so that particularly kids, students can be connected.
Mm-hmm. And so from the education side to the programming side, or the public programming side, as you know, at the Kansas City Public Library, that's a very robust program, and at the Dole Institute, we do too. What is the best way, do you think, museums and libraries can engage in some of the more challenging conversations? We've had a lot of, you know, protests and unrest, and
Sure.
how can we address these things?
So,
what's the role of the museum and the library?
You know, so author talks have been very important for you, and very important for the Kansas City Public Library and lots of libraries. Growing civic engagement, public programming aspect of libraries and of museums that has been a thing for a while, and it's central to a lot of libraries, increasingly a lot of museums. I think there's going to be a lot more virtual versions, just as this is what we're doing right now. One of a program that's important, I think, from the point of view of one of the most important things that's happening right now, the racial protests and the conversation on race in this country. And it needs to be very specific, and it needs to be about what people can do. And libraries are a great place because we partner with, museums are doing this increasingly too, partner with local community organizations around real community issues. So I'll give you an example of something that could be done virtually, and we did, I believe we recorded it originally, so you can probably find it in the Kansas City Public Library website. But there's been concern in Kansas City about the impact of tax increment financing, which is the forgiveness of property taxes for new development, for real estate development. And we're concerned about the impact on the Black community in Kansas City of this. We brought a guy named Walter Johnson, who's a Harvard professor, who's written a book now. He's published a book about this recently in the last few weeks. He's a leading historian of slavery, but he's from Missouri. He's from Columbia, Missouri. And he was reading about Ferguson. And he was interested in that, so he started investigating Ferguson, and he realized that Emerson Electric, which is a Fortune 500 company with 10,000 employees and multi-billion-dollar revenue, was headquartered in Ferguson. And he's reading about their lack of revenue in Ferguson. So he's wondering about that, and he investigated, and he found that Emerson Electric had only paid $59,000 in taxes the year that Michael Brown was shot. But it's a Fortune 500 company headquartered there. How does that happen? Well, it happened through things like tax increment financing, the forgiveness of taxes for theoretically new development that theoretically helps the economy, but of course actually drains the public treasury of Ferguson and Kansas City and other cities that use this property tax money that's usually used for social services like libraries, schools, et cetera, healthcare. And so we presented that in the library, and that can be presented online and could be even presented in a Zoom context like this, where there would be a dialogue where one could invite the mayor, one could invite the real estate developer to have a conversation with someone like Walter Johnson about how this can affect the community. And so we're beginning to do that around the country. And I think that will help take what's been a consciousness raising moment for the country and spread that consciousness into an environment of real political action.
So on the other side of all of this, or years, months into the future, when maybe the coronavirus, we've got a vaccine and things are perhaps more stable, what are some of your goals for IMLS, or as dependent on conditions right now, or or when you took this office as director, what did you hope
Well,
to do with IMLS?
So I hope that IMLS would be about the future of the public library and of museums, and we would focus a lot on the virtual growth, the electronic growth, but also in civic engagement. We're about to come up on, in 5 years, 5.5 years, we'll be on the 250th anniversary of the United States, of the Declaration of Independence. And I think it's a great moment for education at the local level, our history and our ideals. And I think preparing libraries and museums to play a part in a dialogue around that, which would also be a response to what we're going through right now, the pandemic, the racial protests, the economic problems we've got, and how do we as a democracy at the local level, how do we respond to that? And so I was always intending for civic engagement to be a big part of what I wanted to promote at the IMLS during my tenure. And boy, was I given a rich environment to do that. So that's my plan.
Yeah. Our work is never done, and as you say, we've got a wonderful commemoration coming up in the next few years to plan for and prepare for, and to work towards something better, right?
Exactly. And I mean, we've always done that in this country. We've never lived up to our ideals completely, or even just as much as we would expect and hope. We've got to do better at that, but we can, and I think we're going through a moment when we are all determined to do that. So I think libraries and museums will play a big role in that.
Well, thank you so much, Crosby, for your time today. It's been wonderful catching up with you and hearing what you're up to, and can't wait to see all of the projects that come out of IMLS, and especially looking for test results on all this acid-free paper and folders and things like that. So we know we can get back to business.
We will let you know. And thank you, Audrey. This has been a pleasure, and my best to Senator Dole. I noticed that he's still very active, having taken a role in the current Senate campaign in the state of Kansas. So I hope he watches, and I say, hi, Bob.
Yes, it's an inspiration. Just do what you can with the time you have, for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Crosby. Thank you to the folks joining us virtually. We look forward to seeing you again and virtually at the Dole Institute and for the next installment of Living History. Take care, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.